Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 187, Best Sex Ever. What? Yes. We are going to talk about one of the best sexual experiences I had because it came so unexpected. So I wanted to talk about it in a very just real, honest, authentic way. And we're not going to get into the details because there are no details that are new as far as like, we didn't get into new positions. We didn't watch porn. We didn't bring in toys or anything new or novel. None of those things entered the equation at all. And in fact, it was just very kind of normal, average, very vanilla sex, right? As far as all those kinds of things go. And yet it was the very best experience that I have ever had. And I remember afterwards just telling Nick, like, oh, that just really went to number one. That was the best experience ever. And we were just like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Let's have a discussion about that and what actually made that the best experience, because what the world teaches makes the best experience, especially for women, because usually what is shown is what makes the best experience for men is maybe not what's actually happening and taking place, right? We know now that there is a lot of missing information out in the world when it comes to female arousal, their desire for intimacy, the libido. And we know that when we don't have all the correct information and that there are things missing, that knowledge that is needed, then the experience is just like so, if that, for women. And so today I wanted to actually talk about this because it did come as such a surprise. So I wanted to start off with a story of what was actually taking place in my life and my husband's life with our family, because I think that is what really made this so surprising. So sometimes people will get the impression that because I'm a life coach or because Nick is also a life coach and because we have this business, that things must be going pretty well and they must go well like the majority of the time, and that we probably don't face a lot of the same types of challenges or intimacy issues that other couples face, right? Other normal couples or regular couples. And I just want to start off by saying that is absolutely not true. Okay. We are totally normal, average people. We face the same problems everyone else does. And we're very much just like you. And I think that's one of the things that I actually love about life coaching is like, we're just average people. And we do have the same problems that a lot of people have. And so for us, we were actually facing and have been facing a high level of stress in our lives in general. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that are happening that are out of our control. And I think a lot of you know that we have 2 adopted children out of our 5. And one of them has a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to mental illness. And you would think sometimes, even I do this myself, like, oh, just remember to think like he has mental illness and then it will be easier to handle. And it doesn't, because his challenges and the way they manifest are not easy, even knowing that he a lot of times has no control over certain aspects of it. And so he just turned 18. And so as an adult, he is now facing new challenges because he is an adult. and what he thinks that means and what he thinks he can and can't do. And we are coming into all kinds of legal challenges with him. And so we have had to spend a significant amount of time with lawyers, going through laws, trying to look at all the details of how we can help him, what the ramifications are, what the limitations are. And it would be awesome to say that he is loving and grateful and easy and compliant with all these things. But the reality is that he's not. And so it is very challenging. And even through the process, I have my own thoughts and opinions about it. And then so does Nick. And they don't always line up. In fact, they probably are more different than they are the same. And so we also have to navigate being able to try to help our son in a way that's positive, but also continue to navigate our differences in opinion and our approaches to things. Now, we have been married almost 22 years, and we were together for several years before that. So we've been together for a long time, and we've definitely had our share of ups and downs, times that were amazing and easy, and times that have been more challenging and difficult. And I will say, as I have been kind of taking a step back and looking at our marriage and our relationship over the course of these 25 years, this has probably been the most challenging. The last several months, I would say probably 5 to 6 months, has probably been the most challenging. And of course, with that comes a high level of stress. But not only is it just challenging because there's attorneys involved and it's very time consuming, it takes its toll in a lot of different ways, right? We are challenged mentally, emotionally, and physically, right? And of course, those are going to have an effect on our intimacy in that part of our relationship. And we just feel drained and exhausted. And being able to take a step back and say, hey, we've got to be able to go through these things and address these new legal challenges and everything that comes with it. But we still have other children. We still need to be mom and dad. We still have got to help them with homework and all the things that they need. And we still have to be available for our other kids, even though these other new circumstances are taking a ton of our time. So I would say over the last 5 or 6 months, our stress levels are definitely higher than they've ever been in our marriage. And if you've been listening for a while, it will probably come as no surprise that when, especially for women, when our stress levels are high, it blocks our desire to want to be intimate, right? It is like the number one blocker. It is that cortisol that comes to the front. It starts to flood our brain, and it makes it hard to access the other chemicals that really help foster and ignite that sexual desire to be intimate. And so, along with all this, I knew that Valentine's Day was coming up. I'm very clear on let's not make high expectations for what that means. And all that was great. But I remember having a thought. I was like, Valentine's Day is probably going to suck. Right? And that is not like a good thought. It's not a fun thought. But I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, Valentine's Day is probably going to look so different this year. It's probably going to suck. I'm not like super in the mood to even think about Valentine's Day, whereas other years I'm like, I love celebrating love. I just am always excited for it. So it was very different even for me thinking about Valentine's Day and even just the month of February altogether. So when I was thinking about this podcast, I actually kind of wanted to do it last week, like right when things were happening. And but I was like, no, I want to put in the time to actually be able to get into the details, the nitty gritty of how this all came together. So I wanted to talk about like the actual challenge we faced. And that is this. We were facing a high level of stress, and there were a lot of things that we had no control over, especially when it comes to the lawyers, the courts, the legal system, the scheduling, the delays, all those things out of our control. And so we definitely had to try to utilize our skills, right? Our thinking skills to watch our thoughts and to manage them. But I think also going along with that, there was just so much more of it, right? So our stress has been just through the roof. Now, what's interesting is that I think things were coming to a head as we're getting to the peak of some of these court dates and things being pushed back. And now we're coming back to, the meeting with the judge and lawyers and all these things. I remember feeling at a low, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how much more I'm going to be able to handle all this and be the person I want to be. So because I'm a spiritual person, I decided, this is definitely requiring a little bit more prayer on my part. So I have been praying more than normal lately. And this is what I love about life coaching, right? Is that we can combine these things. Life coaching skills never replaces our beliefs, our values, our spiritual connections. It doesn't ever have to replace any of those. And this is a big fear I see with people. They're like, oh my gosh, if I get help, if I go to therapy, if I see a counselor, if I see a life coach, if I read self-help books, that means I don't have faith or I don't have enough faith. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times people just don't get any help because they think it diminishes their faith. And I just want to say that that's not necessarily true, right? We can combine them. We can have them work together in a way that is cohesive and beautiful and powerful and strong. And so this is what I decided to do. I was like, okay, I need more spirituality here, and I need it to like instigate and ignite some of the skills I have with coaching and with thinking about things and my thoughts. And so I was praying for some new thoughts. I was praying to have new thoughts, right, about all this stress. And that is a combination of a high level of spirituality. I'm praying, I'm seeking that guidance from a source that I believe is higher than myself. But I'm also saying, hey, I'm willing to put in the work. I'm willing to use skills. And so I prayed, and a new thought came to my mind. And I definitely believe that this was that spiritual answer to my prayer. And the thought that came to me is not mind-blowing, right? And I'm going to tell you what it was because it's actually very simple. It's a very common thought. And I was like, wow, this is interesting because this isn't anything like super new or revelatory, right? And the new thought was this: something's got to give. That's it. Those three words, something's got to give. Now, with that new thought, that didn't give me any solution to the challenges we were facing, right? It didn't solve things. And so I really want to make that clear, like that particular new thought, it didn't solve my problems, but it actually did. And we're going to talk about that. So sometimes a new thought, when we think, oh, I need a new thought, we think that the new thought has to be like a solution. Oh, that's not true. This new thought I had about something's got to give was not a solution at all. All it was a stepping stone. But it was a magnificent stepping stone because as I started to think this new thought, like something's got to give, I knew I didn't know what the answer was. And I was okay with that because I found so much relief. I found my stress started to go down as I just kept thinking this new thought, like something's got to give. I don't know what that is yet. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know what the answer is yet, but just something. It could be just one thing, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. We're not going to go cancel all of our lawyers and cancel all of our appointments at the court. We're not going to do any of those things, but just something's got to give. And I knew I didn't know what that was, but I still felt better because I was thinking that new thought. Now, did that take away all my stress? No. But did I feel like that there was hope? Yes. Did I feel like I could keep going? Yes. Did I feel more empowered? Yes. So I love this concept of like even just a simple thought that doesn't solve everything can still be so valuable, so significant, so helpful and beneficial. It was definitely serving me and the circumstances that I was facing, that my family was facing. So I would say I probably just felt like 2% better, right? That's not a huge amount, but it matters. We don't need to feel 100% better to progress and not be stuck in life. We just need to feel a little bit better. And that is what that thought did. It just made me feel a little bit better to keep moving forward. And the thing that I like about this is that this thought about something's got to give, because it didn't solve all my problems, I still knew I needed to continue moving forward to continue finding how to solve problems, even when some of them were not solvable, if that makes sense. So I knew that I was going to have to take an action that was probably different than maybe what I had or hadn't done in the last few months. And what came to me as I was thinking about this and trying to say, okay, what is a positive way to move forward? I realized that maybe the one new action I could take would be I need to have a new conversation with Nick, right? Just a new one, maybe one that we haven't had before. And I was like, yeah, that feels right. That is sitting right with me. It feels good. It feels positive. It's not like, hey, change everything about Nick, change everything about my children or about our lives or where we live. Like nothing dramatic, right? It was just like, have a new conversation with him. And I really like the concept of new, and so does our brain. Our brain can get on board with new. Have a new conversation with Nick. Don't talk about the things that maybe you guys have already discussed over the last 5 or 6 months. Let's maybe talk about something new. So that was my goal, my personal goal when it comes to how I was starting to deal with this very stressful situations. Is that I wanted to start a new conversation with Nick. So nothing happened right away, right? In fact, another day or two passed and I just had it on my mind. But one morning last week, Nick came to me and he was like, okay, let's talk about the things that we need to get accomplished for our business this week. And we started to kind of go through that. And partway through, it was actually a very quick conversation. I remember kind of like hesitating with the answers, and he definitely picked up on it. And he's like, okay, like, what's the holdup? And I remember thinking like this is the opportunity to start a new conversation with Nick. And so I just said, well, yes, like all that sounds fine. We need to do all these things. Yes, I agree. And I said, my hesitation is I feel like something's got to give. And I said, I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have the answer to that. And that's okay. And I said, I just know that something's got to give. And whatever, maybe we just need to talk about what that looks like. And so Nick kind of looked at me, and I think he maybe was like, oh no, Shelly's probably going to start in on a conversation about all the things that I'm doing wrong, right? He kind of had that look of defeat. And I was actually really proud of him because he didn't overreact. He didn't say anything negative, nothing. He just was like, I got to run a few errands. And I was like, okay, that's great. So he left and was gone for just a little bit. And in my mind, I was like, oh, he's collecting his thoughts. He's gathering his thoughts, which is great. I was actually very happy when a man or a spouse or a woman is able to say, you know what, I need a few minutes. I need a few minutes. Like, this is a very mature thing. I hope we can recognize when our spouse needs a few minutes that this is good, right? They're trying to manage their brain. They're trying to manage their thoughts, that they're putting in effort. This is great. This is beautiful. And so I appreciated him being willing to take that time to do that. So he came back and we started in on the new conversation. Now, for me, I had a few specific goals in mind with this new conversation. And one of them was to not have any agenda, right? Like, it would be great to say, we have to come up with a solution right now, or you've got to do these things and make changes, hubby. And I maybe will make a change, right? Or, I mean, there's a million different agendas that I could have had or that spouses can have. And I decided I'm going to try to not have an agenda, no agenda. I'm not going to have ideas of how this conversation should go, how it's supposed to go, what the result is going to be. I just know that I need to kind of like, I need to let that go. I need to let the reins go and maybe just be more open that we might come up with a solution. We might come up with what's got to give, what that means, what it looks like. And we might not. We might not come up with a solution. So that was definitely one of my goals, was to not have an agenda so that I would be more open during the conversation and like more receptive to Nick's ideas, Nick's thoughts, like his process of all of it. I wanted to be open to it. And then the other goal that I had it was actually very unique, but I remember thinking, I want to have this conversation, and we might think that meant I wanted to do a lot of talking and expressing and a lot of sharing of my ideas or my frustrations or what I had been going through or how hard things have been. But my goal actually was quite different, and it had to do with communication skills. And I remember setting a goal of, I am going to try to be so succinct, so efficient in my communication that I'm only going to do it in 2-sentence combinations. 2 sentences. I'm going to listen. And if I need to say something, I'm going to try really hard to get it in 2 sentences, which means I'm not going to be like talking for 30 minutes straight and then hope that Nick got my main point. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk in 2-sentence increments. Now, I've never really made this goal for myself, so I was actually surprised that I wanted to make this goal for this conversation. But for some reason, this came strongly to my mind that I should have this goal. So this was my goal, to have this form of communication for myself. Not how Nick should communicate, how I am going to communicate. So this made me really think about the words that I was going to say when it was, when I decided to speak. And was I saying words that were effective and concise and clear? So it was challenging me to be more effective and not be as wordy. And so it also challenged me to not go on and on, right? Not to ramble, not to give lists or the way things that dictate the way that I thought things should go or needed to be. And I had never really done this before in a conversation where I knew there were a lot of things that probably needed a lot of brainstorming from the two of us. And so I knew that this wasn't going to be easy for me. And that was okay. It doesn't have to be easy. We can set goals that are hard for ourselves. And I set a hard goal for myself. So during the conversation, I had these goals in mind, and I realized that my natural tendency was wanting to really express, and dive in, like, look at all the thoughts I'm having, look at all the feelings I'm having, look at all the challenges that we're facing. It's not easy. And I I stuck to my goals. I held my tongue and really wanted to accomplish my goal. And this is a huge distinction, right? This is not Nick's goal. Nick didn't tell me to do this. He wasn't like, hey, yeah, let's have a conversation, but Shelly, I need you to stick to 2 sentences, right? He didn't say anything about that. He didn't even know that I had this goal. He never had that awareness, right? He was not involved. So this was not Nick's goal. This is not Nick's goal for me for every conversation. No, this was my own goal. So my desire to keep it was very high for myself. So what ended up happening is I did a lot less talking and a lot more listening. And it was awesome. It was amazing. It was amazing. I had to put my big girl panties on and be a mature adult and not interrupt Nick, not reroute the conversation so that it was more in my favor or whatever. I did none of those things. I stuck to my goals. Now, this is not always easy to do. It wasn't easy for me. Women usually find a lot of connection and relief through conversations. So we naturally want to do a lot of the talking. And so I really had to stick to my guns and be the mature adult. And Nick was a mature adult, right? Me saying that has nothing to do with Nick. It has to do with me. I had to be a mature adult. And so because I had these 2 goals in mind, what ended up happening is I wasn't worried about an agenda. I wasn't worried about, oh, the solution has to go my way. So I had no attempts to try to control Nick or the conversation or say, hey, you can't say that. None of those things took place. And so I actually was very open to everything he was saying. And I was just ingesting all of his words in a way that I probably hadn't done for a while. I'm a good listener, but I think sometimes I do probably go in with some agenda. And this time I had none. So I became a better listener. I did. I became a better listener when I let go of my agenda. So 45 minutes later, we're in this conversation, right? It is not an easy conversation. I just want to make that clear. We're talking about hard things, challenging things. We're talking about things that maybe could really offend the other spouse, right? Maybe we're saying things in a way that is not always the best format or whatever. It is not an easy conversation that we're having. But I notice after about 45 minutes, I have an awareness of myself and I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm not angry. I'm not frustrated with him or with the conversation. And I'm not bothered that we don't have solutions yet. And actually, I actually am surprised by how I feel. Like, what am I feeling right now? And I felt a little bit like I did feel some relief that we were having the conversation. But what I realized as I paid attention and clued into my body and like tried to label what I was actually feeling, the sensation, the vibration in my body, I was surprised, shocked, in fact, because I found that I was like, huh, we've been discussing really hard things for 45 minutes. It has not all been pleasant. I haven't expressed a lot because of the goal I had for myself. And yet I'm finding that 45 minutes into this conversation, I'm kind of turned on. I was turned on in the middle of a difficult conversation. And this surprised me because I was not expecting this. And I was like, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. This is amazing. And so it really piqued like my own curiosity about the whole process, the whole conversation. I'm like, is it what he's saying that is really getting me turned on? Is it the words? Like, what is happening? And I was so curious. I was so fascinated. I was intrigued because this seemed so mysterious. This seemed new to me. Usually when we think of like, oh, this is hard. This is like you have to come to the table with some level of maturity. And it's not easy. We're not solving everything fast. And so I found it very mysterious that I could be turned on in the middle of this challenge. And I actually found it very adventurous and fun. I was like, ooh, I like this. This is giving me insight into myself in this circumstance with what's going on. That's like it's not fun. There's nothing sexy about this. There's nothing romantic. We didn't plan a romantic conversation. We're talking about crappy stuff. And I was totally turned on by it. So the conversation continued, and I realized that the more I listened to Nick, the more turned on I became. Wow. This was an awesome experience. And I have to say I was enjoying it because I was recognizing, oh, like I'm turned on. Like this is a fun feeling. I enjoy feeling this. And again, I wasn't falling into like the typical thing that is often out in the world, like, oh, women want to connect just by the conversation. They want to do all the talking. I wasn't doing all the talking. This was like a full switch, a full reversal. Nick was doing most of the talking. And I wasn't oppositional to it because I didn't have my own agenda. I wasn't like on the defense. I wasn't fighting it. I was like listening and being open and receptive and trying to absorb all of it. So I wasn't the one that was sharing most of my thoughts and feelings. It was my husband. It was Nick. And so I was really fascinated by the role reversal of what is like typically taught out in the world about women and being turned on, because the opposite was also happening. The more I was listening and talking less, I was being turned on to a high degree. And so I was like, this is fun. It became super fun for me. And I was just trying to keep it in check because we were having such an important conversation, and I wanted to see it through to see what the end result would be. So here is what is key, and what I was starting to take away from it is that as he talked and as I listened, he ended up saying things that addressed some of the negative thoughts that I had been having over the last several months, even though like we hadn't, we would talk about things here and there and say, okay, we got to do this or we got to do that. But I had been having a lot of negative thoughts about these circumstances that we were facing. And I hadn't done self-coaching models on some of them, right? And I hadn't expressed a lot of them to Nick, nor had I done the work myself. But I definitely was having negative thoughts, and I was having a lot of them. And I realized that the more I was listening to Nick, the more he was saying that was actually addressing them. And I was like, this is fascinating. This is so good. It's so valuable. And I didn't know that that was coming from that experience. I didn't go into it going, now, if I listen to Nick, all of the things he says is going to solve all my problems and it's going to address all of my negative thoughts. No, I didn't even know that was going to happen. Now, the beautiful thing is because I didn't expect that to happen, I didn't have an expectation for it to happen, right? I didn't go, okay, now if I just be a good listener, then Nick's words will solve my problems. I didn't do that, right? I just went into the conversation with my own goal and to be open. So as I listened to how he was thinking about things, the thoughts that were in his mind, and how he was processing things and how he was trying to deal with things and manage things for himself, I was able to take my process and my thinking to a deeper level. And that was a beautiful thing. So beautiful to be able to go, oh, what he is saying really helps me with this other negative thought I was having. This is awesome. I can put that negative thought to rest now because now, like, his insight clarifies this thing for me, this negative thought. It was addressing things that I just hadn't really addressed before or done a self-coaching model for. And the beautiful thing was that it actually corrected some of the negative thoughts that I had been having. It corrected them. And this is like what happens to humans all the time, especially in relationships, especially in marriage. This is what happens between husband and wife. We think things, whether it was about my son or the courts or our lives and the stress or about one another, we think negative things. We have negative assumptions and they're not true. Like 98% of them are not true. So most of our lives we're operating on these negative thoughts. And by me listening and doing less talking, I was realizing Nick was really like clarifying all these negative assumptions that I had been having. And it was awesome. Like I could just feel the stress relieving. It was lessening. I was feeling lighter. And I was grateful and appreciative to him that he was taking the time to actually just have this conversation. And I think he also knew that like we didn't have all the answers. But he was able and willing to just talk through, to just talk and have these conversations. So it really corrected my negative assumptions that I had in my own mind. And I'll say this, just by listening, he clarified some of the negative assumptions I had about what he was thinking about me during all this stress. I didn't even realize that I had been doing this on a very like subconscious level, that I had been having all these negative thoughts like, oh, he probably thinks this about me right now. He probably thinks like I need to be more like this, or I need to be less of this, or all these thoughts about the type of mom I was, or the type of business person I was, or the type of wife or lover that I was. I started building this case, a negative case against myself, not even realizing that I was actually doing that. But through this conversation, he was actually addressing several of these negative assumptions that I was having, these negative thoughts. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what have I been doing? What have I been doing to myself? I didn't even realize I was doing that. And I want to bring that up because we all do this. It's human nature to kind of do this. And sometimes we don't even realize that we are doing it. And this was definitely me. So I want to point out that as I was listening to Nick, it's not that he was like, what's your problem? And I'm going to solve it, right? That's not what was taking place. But as I was open, as I was listening to him, my thoughts changed. My negative thinking changed. My negative assumptions changed. And that was an intimacy igniter. Whereas before, it was being like an intimacy killer, right? It was like squashing desire. And now all of a sudden, things were changing. And yet we weren't even talking about sex or intimacy or any of those things. And yet there was a change that was taking place. So I wanted to point out that my negative thought that had been like kind of flying under the radar went something like this. My husband probably thinks blank about me. And that blank, it was not anything good, right? I was putting a lot of negative stuff in there. So I wonder if we can all take a minute to just tap into our thoughts and say, have I thought that? Have I thought, oh, my husband's probably thinking this about me, or my wife is probably thinking this thing about me. That has its results, right? It has its consequences when we have thoughts like that, and especially if we're having multiple thoughts. So what happened next, right? I had this awareness that I was starting to feel different, that I was starting to feel turned on, but we were still in the middle of the conversation. So we just continued. I just had the awareness, but we continued through the conversation. It's not like we came up with like, oh, this is what we're going to do. This is the final solution to everything that we're facing, because there aren't a lot of solutions to what we're going through. And afterwards, we're like, okay, we kind of ended the conversation. There was no like full, clear solution. We were both okay with that. We're like, okay, it will come. And then we kind of were like, okay, but these are the next things we need to do today for business. And and with our kids, this is the schedule for the day. We listed all the things that we needed to get done. We agreed, we hugged, we embraced. We're like, oh, I'm so glad we at least had a conversation and that it was good and that we have positive feelings towards each other at the end of it. And we were grateful for it. And we're like, okay, now we gotta move on. We got things to do, right? We got to get to the business of life. And Nick expressed to me like, oh, like I wish we could make love right now. Like it would just be awesome, but like we shouldn't, right? We've got things to do. And I agreed. I was like, yeah, we got to get going. The time is ticking. So we started to head off on our way. And that for me lasted about 30 seconds. And I was like, no. We are not going to just brush this off when we are both actually feeling connected, feeling love for one another, and feeling a desire to be intimate. Like, let's not ignore this. Let's pause. Let's put the busyness on pause and say, you know what? The dishes can wait, because they needed to wait. And so I was like, I remember just thinking, no, like I'm paying attention to my body. I'm paying attention to the vibrations, the sensations, and my body kind of wants to go. Like, let's get into this. And so I remember saying to Nick, like, lock the door. Like, no, let's put the busyness on hold for a minute. And let's be together. Let's make love. Lock the door. Now, I want to say that our intimate experience that took place right then and there was for sure, hands down, the best sex ever. And like I said at the beginning, there were no new sex positions involved. There are no toys. We didn't watch porn. There was nothing like, hey, let's bring in something kinky right now. Like, we didn't need any of it. It was actually very normal sex, very vanilla. And yet it was the most orgasmic, the most pleasurable, the most fulfilling, the most enjoyable, the most satisfactory, the most connected sex ever. So how is that possible? When we're facing high levels of stress in our lives, so many things out of our control, so many things we can't solve right away in the moment, and we're still not coming up with new solutions to make everything better and easy in our lives, right? Those things still remain. They still suck. They're still stressful. And yet we just had amazing, amazing sex, right? The best. And I also want to point out that this was not like what sometimes they show in the movies where you're just like mad at each other and you're angry and you're yelling and things are intense. And then there's like this fast, crazy makeup sex. No, this wasn't that. This is like two adults with 5 kids and having a conversation about like things suck right now. Right? This is not how we envision like the scenario to set up the best sex ever. This is like quite opposite of it. But we're 2 adults that came to the table with our, big boy and big girl panties on, saying we got to at least have the conversation. We're both struggling. Our family is struggling, but we're trying. We are trying. So, what I want to end this episode on is a plea to both the husbands and the wives. Husbands, do not underestimate the power of conversations with your wife, even if you're doing most of the talking. Don't allow your brain to have the thought of like, oh, she's just like women who just want a conversation because that's what gets them in the mood. Don't fall into that trap and dismiss what is actually and what can actually take place in a conversation as you are real and as you show up with your wife in a conversation and you're just open and you're like, these are my thoughts. Yeah, they're not all pretty. They're sometimes messy. And here are my feelings, and they're not all good. Some of them are negative. Husbands, when you do that and you open up to your wife, that is a conversation your wife is also going to enjoy. As you do that, don't underestimate the power of what is taking place in your wife's mind during that conversation, because she is making connections that she hasn't made before during that conversation. She is thinking new thoughts. She is gaining clarity. She is starting to face some of her own negative thoughts that she may have been pushing down and not doing the work on. And you're giving her these opportunities to really dig a little bit deeper for herself by listening to you. This also gives you an opportunity to allow her desire and her libido to percolate and to start to build up and increase. This is going to provide you an opportunity to really satisfy that buildup. And during this process, right, as your wife is listening and starting to make new connections in her own mind about you, about herself, about your relationship, your connection, like you are giving her an opportunity to be turned on, to feel her own desire as she goes through that process in her mind. You're going to be a good lover, because as that desire increases in her body and then you're able to make love after, that is checking off all the boxes for her. When her desire is high and full, the lovemaking process is way more pleasurable and way more fulfilling. So you're able to help provide that for her just by having conversations with her. So do not underestimate the power of you actually sharing more of your thoughts and feelings with her through conversations. Now, for the women, right? The wives, do not underestimate the power of listening to your husband, right? We don't have to do all the talking all the time. We don't have to do all the sharing. I need to share my thoughts. I need to share my feelings. I need to share. Yes, we do need to, but we also need to remember our husbands need to do that too. And that there's value in us being the listeners, and that we can have our own experience as the listener, right? We can still make deep, meaningful, powerful connections in our own brain as we are listening to our spouse with openness and without a hidden agenda and without the need to try to control the outcome, right? Being able to set goals about maybe communicating less in some conversations at times, that has its own value. You become a better communicator. This is great. This is really, really great. When we can say things in 2 sentences rather than 2 hours, our husband can hear it. It's hard for him to pick out the important things after we lecture them for 2 hours. But if we can be succinct in 2 sentences, their brain can absorb that. So it really helps move the relationship forward in a positive way when we take that on as a personal goal. As we're listening to our husband, we don't have to get caught up in like, oh, he gets to do all the sharing and I don't. No, it will be a back and forth. But when we take on the initiative to sometimes be the listener this can bring new insight for us. This is a fun experience for us. This is invigorating because as we gain new insight, that sparks something within us, inside of us. We feel alive. We feel motivated, even amidst all of our problems, even in the middle of it. We can still feel these amazing feelings. And as we're having these conversations, as we're listening to our spouse, we will have some level of appreciation and gratitude that, hey, he's here. He's showing up. He's having this conversation. He's sharing his thoughts. He's sharing his feelings, his insight, his challenges. He's sharing things with me. He's making these things known to me. That is the basis of intimacy. Ooh, and that's kind of sexy, right? He's not running away. He's there for the conversation. He's like, I'm here. It's not easy and it may not always be pretty, but I'm here. I'm in it. Ooh, there's a level of appreciation there that a woman can feel that's like, I kind of like that. I like that effort. Oh, that effort is that's a turn on. I didn't expect to feel sexy right now, but I'm kind of feeling sexy as he's expressing these things. And I think for women, if we're like, hey, I struggle to feel desire, maybe this could really be that aha moment. Like, listen to your husband, listen to his negative thoughts. Don't be afraid of them. Listen to them and watch, be observant as to what happens to you as you do that with just genuine curiosity of what he's going through. And I also finally love that there is a high level of clarity that comes through conversations, even if you don't solve anything, right? You can make the clarity really lead to a higher level of understanding that is deep, meaningful, personal, and valuable. That's the beauty of conversation, right? Is that you understand your person more. And as you understand them more, you understand yourself more and your role in their lives. You understand that with clarity instead of incorrect assumptions. And that is a beautiful, beautiful experience. As my husband was explaining some of the things to me, his thoughts and his frustrations, he was addressing some of my own negative assumptions about myself. I learned more about myself in that conversation than I did in the previous 5 or 6 months. And I was grateful to him for that. I loved him for that. He didn't know those things. He didn't know that was all those things were happening for me or that he was addressing those things. That's just what happened naturally through that conversation. That's a beautiful thing that is available to us. We cannot underestimate the power of having some conversations with our spouse. So the result was we still don't have solutions to all the things that are happening in our lives, but we were able to really connect as a husband and wife. I was able to have the most amazing sex ever. As a result, I was able to tap into that degree of desire and recognize that it was increasing the more I was listening. And we felt really connected as a couple. And that is a beautiful result. So I want to offer that to everybody that your lives are challenging. All of our lives are challenging. We all face struggles. We all face issues that we can't always solve right away and maybe never, right? I know with our son and some of his mental illness, like there's no solution to some of these things that he faces. We will face them forever, but we can still feel very connected, magnetic. We can have an incredible, intimate life with one another. And I want to offer that having these conversations and allowing our brain to absorb and be open and think new thoughts is the way that we can do that. So if you need any help, if this sounds like, hey, I want some of that, if you need any help with this, please get on my website, Shelly.Anderson.Coaching, and sign up for some one-on-one coaching. It does not take long, right? 6 to 8 sessions is usually all it takes to see an incredible improvement. And guess what? You don't have to change your personality, and you don't have to change your spouse's personality to have these amazing results. So don't be hesitant to get one-on-one coaching with me. I would love to help you through that, because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.